I'm bringing in real professionals. Family sentiment won't run this company. That's what my brother Brandon said when he terminated my partnership. Just like that. 25 years building sterling wealth management. And he cut me loose with a handshake and corporate speak. My name is Maxwell Sterling. I'm 41, and until last week I was senior partner at the investment firm my dad started in our Lincoln Park office back in 1988. Brandon's 39, 2 years younger, but he's been acting like the heir apparent since he learned to walk. Dad always said Brandon had the killer instinct for high finance. Me, I was the steady hand, the one clients trusted with their retirement funds and their kids' college money. The morning he called me into the conference room, I knew what was coming. Brandon sat behind Dad's old desk wearing a suit that cost more than most people make in a month. The two outside investors flanked him like bodyguards. "Maxwell, we need to talk about your role moving forward," he started. I sat across from him in the same chair where I'd pitched my first client presentation 17 years ago. "The firm's evolving," Brandon continued. "We're moving into aggressive investment strategies, cryptocurrency portfolios, high-yield derivatives, venture capital partnerships, the kind of plays that require a certain mindset." He paused, watching my face for a reaction. I didn't give him one. "You're brilliant with the conservative clients, Maxwell. But that's yesterday's market. Today's wealth builders want growth, not safety." I knew where this was heading, but I let him finish his speech. 25 years of partnership, and he couldn't even give me the courtesy of honesty. When he finally got to the point about terminating my role, I stood up and extended my hand. "Understood. Good luck," I said quietly. Brandon shook my hand, probably expecting a fight. Instead, I walked out of that conference room and started making phone calls. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Building sterling wealth management wasn't just my career, it was my life. Dad started the firm when I was 18. While Brandon was off playing lacrosse at Northwestern, I was learning the business from the ground up. Filing paperwork, cold calling prospects, driving Dad to client meetings. By the time Brandon graduated and joined the firm, I'd already established relationships with half our client base. Doctors who trusted me with their settlements. Lawyers who let me manage their retirement accounts. 4 old Chicago families whose wealth went back to the meatpacking industry. These weren't flashy entrepreneurs looking for the next big score. They were people who valued consistency, integrity, and returns that compounded quietly over decades. Brandon always saw that as a limitation. "We're leaving money on the table, Maxwell," he'd say whenever I'd recommend a conservative bond over some venture capital scheme. But I knew our clients. Dr. Samantha Parker didn't want to triple her wealth in 5 years. She wanted to know her retirement was secure. The Walsh Family Trust wasn't looking for explosive growth. They wanted preservation of capital that had survived 2 world wars and the 2008 financial crisis. The cracks started showing 8 months ago. Brandon began scheduling client meetings without me, pitching new investment strategies that made me nervous. Then came the outside investors from Nova Capital Holdings with expensive watches and thin smiles. Dad seemed uncomfortable with them, but Brandon had convinced him these were the partners who could take sterling wealth management to the next level. I started noticing changes. Phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. Emails I wasn't copied on, documents that required only Brandon's signature when they used to require both partners' approval. The morning Brandon terminated my partnership, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how calm I felt walking out of that building. If you're enjoying watching family business politics backfire spectacularly, make sure to subscribe because Brandon's about to learn that some relationships can't be restructured. I sat in my car for an hour after Brandon dismissed me. Not because I was devastated, I'd seen this coming. I sat there because I was calculating. 25 years of client relationships don't just belong to sterling wealth management. They belong to the person who built them. Brandon thought he was inheriting a client list, What he was actually inheriting was my reputation, my relationships, and my word. 4 months earlier, I'd noticed something interesting in our partnership agreements. A clause buried deep in the documentation that gave certain high-value clients the right to redirect their investments immediately upon any change in senior management. It was standard language, the kind of protective measure wealthy families insist on. Brandon hadn't bothered reading the fine print. Neither had his Nova Capital investors. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. Dr. Samantha Parker, attorney Catherine Walsh from the Walsh Family Trust, Victoria Cross, who managed the Cross Foundation, 6 families who represented over $95 million in managed assets, 6 families who'd trusted me personally for more than a decade. The first call was to Dr. Parker. "Samantha, it's Maxwell Sterling. I wanted to let you know there have been management changes at the firm, and I wanted to discuss your options under the Partnership Protection Clause." Her response was immediate. "Are you leaving, Maxwell?" "I've been asked to step down from my partnership role." "Then so am I. What do you need me to do?" By the end of our conversation, she'd agreed to transfer her entire portfolio, $14 million, to whatever firm I established next. Similar conversations with Catherine Walsh and the others. By the time I drove home that evening, I'd secured commitments for $95 million in transferred assets. The beautiful part was Brandon's timing. He terminated my partnership on a Friday afternoon, probably planning to announce his new vision Monday morning. What he didn't realize was that gave me an entire weekend to execute the client notifications required by the partnership protection clauses. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I was up at 5 a.m., reviewing legal documents I'd been preparing for months. By 7 a.m., I was at Riverside Legal Associates, the law firm that had helped me incorporate Sterling Financial Advisory 3 months earlier. 6 asset transfer requests, each one perfectly legal under the partnership protection clauses Brandon had never bothered to understand. $95 million moving from Sterling Wealth Management to my new firm before Brandon even opened his office. I was back home by 9 a.m. when my phone started ringing. "Maxwell, what the hell did you do?" Brandon's voice was tight with panic. "I exercise my clients' contractual rights," I said. "You can't just steal our clients." "I didn't steal anything," I replied. "I informed them of their options under the management change provisions. They made their own decisions." The line went quiet. When Brandon spoke again, his voice had changed. "You think you're clever, Maxwell, but you've made a serious mistake. We have legal grounds to block any transfers." "Actually, you don't," I said. "I wrote most of those contracts. I made sure the protection clauses were ironclad." "We'll see about that," Brandon snapped. "I'm calling our lawyers." Brandon was about to make his first real mistake as managing partner. He'd spend thousands on legal fees and ultimately discover what I already knew. The contracts were bulletproof. But Brandon's real problem wasn't legal. It was mathematical. With $95 million walking out the door, Brandon had just lost over $1.7 million in annual revenue. The Nova Capital investors weren't going to be happy. My phone rang again around noon. "Maxwell, this is your father. We need to talk." I drove to the office, wondering what kind of reception I'd get. Rebecca, our receptionist, looked uncomfortable when I walked in. "He's waiting in the conference room," she said quietly. I found Dad sitting alone at the mahogany table where Brandon had terminated my partnership 3 days earlier. "Brandon tells me you've stolen our clients," Dad said. "Brandon tells you a lot of things," I replied. "The question is whether you believe them." Dad studied my face. "What did you do?" "I gave 6 clients the information they needed to make informed decisions," I explained. Information Brandon should have provided when he announced the management changes. And they all chose to leave. I pulled out a folder containing copies of the 6 contracts that had just cost Brandon $95 million. Page 4, Section 12, I said, sliding Dr. Parker's contract across the table. Standard wealth protection language. In the event of a change in senior management, limited partners have the right to immediate asset reallocation without penalty. Dad put on his reading glasses and studied the document. You wrote this clause into every major contract, Dad said. Every one, I confirmed. You taught me to protect our clients' interests, Dad. He looked at me with something that might have been respect. Brandon doesn't know about these clauses, does he? Dad asked. Brandon doesn't read contracts, I said. He signs them and moves on. Dad was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. There's something you need to know about those investors. They didn't just want a partnership stake. They wanted to acquire us outright. The plan was to use our client relationships to bootstrap a much larger investment fund. The pieces fell into place. Brandon's aggressive expansion plans, the meetings I wasn't invited to. They were never planning to keep me around, I said. Brandon convinced them you'd be a problem, Dad explained. Too conservative, too attached to the old ways. And now? I asked. Dad almost smiled. Now they're looking at a firm that just lost 65% of its managed assets in a single morning. The growth projections Brandon promised them are mathematically impossible. What are you asking me, Dad? I said. I'm asking what it would take for you to consider returning those clients to Sterling Wealth Management. He replied, Under Brandon's management? Nothing, I said firmly. What about under different management? Dad asked. I thought about the trust those clients had placed in me personally, the new firm I'd already incorporated, the office space I'd already leased. I appreciate the offer, Dad, but I think it's too late for that. Tuesday morning brought interesting developments. Victoria Cross called with news that the Cross Foundation trustees wanted to transfer their full portfolio, $32 million, and were recommending me to other Chicago families concerned about changes in their wealth management. By Tuesday afternoon, I had inquiries from 5 additional families representing another $48 million. Word was spreading through Chicago's wealth management community. Wednesday brought legal threats from Brandon's attorneys. Thursday brought news that the Nova Capital investors had pulled out after running the numbers and realizing their projections were impossible without my clients. Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Brandon terminated my partnership, I was in my new office overlooking Lake Michigan when my assistant announced a visitor. Says his name is Brandon. I found my brother in the reception area looking like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his confidence gone. Maxwell, we need to talk. I led him into my office, noting how he took in the lake view, the mahogany desk, the client photos already hanging on the walls. Nice setup, he said, but there was no admiration in his voice. What can I do for you, Brandon? He sat down heavily. I need those clients back. Which clients would those be? Don't play games with me, Maxwell. The Parkers, the Walshes, the Cross Foundation, all of them. Those clients made their own decisions based on contractual rights. The investors pulled out yesterday. Without them, I can't cover overhead. The firm's hemorrhaging money. I studied my brother's face, seeing genuine fear for the first time. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked. I'm asking you to come back as senior partner, Brandon said desperately. We can rebuild this together. Under whose management? I questioned. Brandon's jaw tightened. Mine. I'm managing partner now. Then you have everything you wanted, I said calmly. I don't see the problem. The problem is I can't run a firm without clients, Brandon admitted, and the clients followed you. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. You terminated my partnership because you said you were bringing in real professionals, I said finally. You were right about that. So you'll consider coming back? Brandon asked hopefully. No, Brandon, I replied firmly. I'm saying you're about to discover just how professional I can be. Sterling Wealth Management closed 6 months later. Brandon couldn't cover overhead without the steady revenue from long-term contracts. Dad called when Brandon finally admitted defeat. He's shutting it down, Dad said. 27 years and it's over. I'm sorry it came to this, I replied. Are you? Dad asked. I looked around my office at Sterling Financial Advisory. 8 months after opening, we were managing over $150 million in assets. 4 senior staff from Sterling Wealth Management had joined us. I'm sorry Brandon couldn't see past his own ambition, I said finally, but no regrets about building something better. 2 weeks later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photo from our Christmas party 4 years earlier. Brandon and I standing together behind Dad, all 3 smiling. On the back, someone had written, "Before it all went wrong." I studied that photo, remembering the man Brandon used to be before ambition corrupted his judgment. Then I filed it away. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt, but sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Building something with integrity takes time, but destroying it with arrogance happens remarkably fast. The most professional move is sometimes simply stepping aside and letting people face the consequences of their own choices.